Hello and welcome to the MilVet Podcast. Your podcast hosts are Brendan Aronson and Tim Shaw. We are military veterans, entrepreneurs, and investors. Most importantly, we strive to empower military service members, veterans, and their families. We believe that every veteran deserves a career that fires them up, a career in which you can learn, earn, and build a world-class network. On this podcast, we interview civilian and military veteran leaders who are incredible founders, writers, thinkers, and investors. Our primary goal is to inspire you to achieve great things. Let's dive into today's episode.
Today's guest is U.S. Army retired General Richard Clark. General Clark was born in Stuttgart, West Germany, and was raised in an Army family. He graduated from West Point in 1984 and holds an MBA from Benedictine College along with a master's degree from the War College. General Clark's distinguished career included being the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, where he led a joint force of over 75,000 military members, including Army Rangers, Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Air Force Commandos, and Marine Raiders. He retired from the military on August 30th, 2022. I look forward to learning more about Rich's journey. Thank you so very much for joining us today, sir. To kick us off, can you please share what it was like growing up in an Army family?
Yeah. Hey, Tim, thanks for having me. And it's good to be connected with you. And thanks for what you do. Hey, I loved growing up in a military family. I had two younger brothers. So the three of us, along with great parents, moved about every 2 or 3 years. But I had built-in friends as I moved from Army post and to different towns and cities throughout Europe and the United States. And so I think that gave me somewhat of an appreciation for what military life was. And truthfully, I enjoyed it and enjoyed, growing up and see what my dad did. Distinctly remember my dad's 2 tours in Vietnam, where at that point in time, we didn't have unit replacement, where the entire unit picks up from Fort Bragg or Fort Campbell or someplace and moves. My dad was an individual replacement sent to units. And during that time, he was gone for an entire year. And my brothers and I would pick up and go to my mom and dad's hometown in West Virginia. So I remember those times pointedly when dad was gone when I was, I think, age 5 and age 8.
And then growing up, after your family moved around, you went to West Point. I'm curious, as a young cadet, did you think you would make the military a long career and become a 4-star? Like, what were you thinking about when you started as a West Point cadet?
Yeah, Tim, the furthest from it. Honestly, you could ask my classmates from West Point who would probably confirm that I was the least likely to stay in, least likely to graduate, let alone the least likely to have a full career. But I fell in love with the Army. Once I joined the soldiers, the mission, and in my timing of service, I hit my mandatory commitment at about, in the late 89, 90. And then we had Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And so that deployment and then subsequent opportunities kept me around. And I wasn't even sure I'd go past 5. But then I said, well, I'll just go to 20 so I can get this military retirement. But I never saw myself rising to head Special Operations Command, moving, past the, any, significant rank whatsoever. I just loved it and just did my duty every day, and enjoyed, working in every single job, doing my best.
What were some of your favorite assignments, if you could name like a few?
Yeah. I mean, even when I was a 4-star general commanding special ops, I'd still say I wish I could be a battalion commander again. The best job, I believe, and truthfully the most important job in the Army is as a battalion commander. It's that rank where you really have day in, day out direct leadership, but you also have a staff and you have organizational leadership that really can make a difference in a soldier's life. And I was fortunate enough that I got to command two battalions, one in the 82nd with 3504 with two deployments, and then to First Ranger battalions after that. So 4 straight years of battalion command. And in those organizations, you can get to know just about everybody, and you can really make a difference. In those positions. So those were by far the best jobs I ever had. All of them were great, or I wouldn't have stayed in. But those are the two that I had the most fond memories.
It sounds like those leadership positions were also pretty challenging given the time of when you were a battalion commander.
Yeah, I mean, that was 2002 to 2006. We were really finding ourselves coming and going. You're either in Iraq or Afghanistan, or you're coming back, getting ready to go again. And that continued, really in my time to through 2011, when we left Iraq, for 3 years until we made the decision to go back into Iraq again.
What's it been like since you've transitioned out of the military? What have you been working on, and how much fear or trepidation did you have?
Yeah. Tim, I wouldn't say there was fear, maybe a little bit of trepidation leaving. This is all I knew for almost 39 years that I was in. You had a job, you had health care, you knew where you lived. The Army gave me quarters. I rented a house from the government for almost my whole time. It was the house we're in now was only the second house my wife and I bought in almost 40 years. But it was the transition of day in, day out. The mission, what you have to do. You're always challenged to what is this going to be like going from 100 miles an hour, maybe to zero, maybe a slowdown, and that was probably the biggest trepidation. And then, truthfully, I personally, from the advice of many mentors that I talked to, didn't take any work, did no positions for 6 months, and I would continue. If you can, don't immediately leave. Some people can do it successfully. Leave the military on Friday and start work on Monday. Because of the time I'd spent in, and because I didn't have to jump into work right away with my pension, I took 6 months off just to think about it and see the landscape. And really, it wasn't that I didn't do. I didn't sit and do nothing. I really took the time to learn, to read, and primarily to talk to people. And I think if there's something for the audience, I think is worth sharing, is there's a great network out there. But if you're retiring, I don't care if you're a captain who spent 5 years in the Army, or a Navy SEAL. I was literally just on a call with a Navy SEAL who left after 12 years right before this, and just talking to him about his future. People want to help, and I've availed myself to lots of folks, but people also availed themselves to me, and talking to people and asking them questions, and trying to see what's out there. One, you learn from it, but then the second, it lets people know that you're out looking. So there's a recency bias related to, hey, wait, somebody's looking for someone to do something. I just talked to Tim. he's looking. Maybe I could connect. And some of those turn to something. A lot of those turn to nothing. But it's good to keep that network out and keep it going. And I did a lot of that during that intervening 6 months before I committed to any real work and any real job. And I think it's important to share that.
The two things we constantly tell veterans we meet and also the audience, the listenership is one is networking. You always have to be networking. Even if you've got a job or even if you feel really good, you just have to be out there. And the second is the best quote unquote secret society and the most exclusive club is the military veteran club. Veterans will help another veteran out more than like my Stanford Business School, my Stanford Law School, any other organization. Like veterans will pick up the phone for other veterans.
Yes. One, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's important. I think it's important that we do that and help other veterans out. And whether it's vet to vet or it's a vet to someone who never served. But Tim, I'd also say that people who didn't serve, and for a lot of them for various reasons, they just couldn't, because of their circumstances or health reasons. I've also found they want help too. So I wouldn't make it just limiting vet to vet, especially if you can get the connection to someone. Because I've seen people really bend over backwards. They've done it for me, bending over backwards to introduce. And I shared when I was getting out that I think may be worthwhile. I would make sure I kind of ended any conversation with two questions, and one was because I was interested in the venture capital. I was interested in board type work that could be private companies or public companies. I asked two questions. One was, who is the best board member you've ever seen and why? You don't have to tell me a name, but more of the why. What did they do? What made them? What was their superpower? What made them so good? The second thing is, what should I read in order to help me learn and understand this? And I got some tremendous book recommendations. Some of them sitting on the shelf behind me that really helped me with that transition. Because I think it's really important to network. But there's a self-development you have to do on your own through reading and through study. That you can't just say I want to be out there. You got to put some onus on you.
And now that you're out in the private sector, I think you spend a lot of time with startups. Can you share more about what you're working on now?
Yeah, Tim, I've taken, because different people take different approaches. Some go to full-time, I would say, operational jobs, 9 to 5. I wanted to go the other route and have a broad portfolio of different things. And so one of this that I'm passionate about is on the venture capital side of advising venture capital companies as they look at their portfolio companies. And I could play a role of anything, and I do play a role of anything from looking with them at potential companies that may have some nexus in the security environment. That would be one thing that I help them with. Two would be to help their current portfolio companies in terms of, one, it could be introductions of people in the security space. But the other thing I found is sometimes I'll just go spend half a day, an entire day, a couple hours at that company, physically in their headquarters, talking to them, getting to know the CEO, looking at their management, if they scaled from, like in one company's case, they've grown from 30 to 300 in the space of a year and a half. That requires a different type of management and leadership approach than whenever all 30 are in the same office space. And all of a sudden I have 30 that are working remotely. How do you do that? and what are some of the systems and processes. I sat with one portfolio company an entire day, went to every meeting with the CEO, and just watched how he organized and worked, and just gave him some advice. So it's a lot of fun working with that, because I enjoy the small companies, and I think, particularly in the security space, they're going to have some great product that can help our country in the long run.
And then do you specifically these days work with some funds on this, or do you work specifically with companies, or both?
Both, but particularly with the venture capital company, wherever they want me to go and what helps them the most.
And is this IVP?
This is institutional venture partners.
Cool.
Yes, they're great.
Very, how should I say, blue chip firm, Sandhill firm. Everyone knows them. For the audience, typically known for more later stages, but later stage is a vague description. So like my understanding is maybe like Series B and beyond.
Yes.
And then for IVP, has defense tech or dual use been a focus for a long period, or like did they start doing it and added you, or did you come in and you start doing it? How did that work?
No, it was really just it's been a partnership. I wouldn't say that they are defense tech specific, but there are some dual use cases, Tim, and those are the ones that I may advise them on and go in some initial calls with. Yeah, but they're just a really, as you described, a blue chip firm with tremendous partners, and I really like their culture, their professionalism, and their character, because they always do everything above board, and they're just a really good team.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's really key for folks to, I say, take away, in the sense of who you work with in the post-military is even more important. Because in the military, you can assume good intent, you can assume everyone's competence and character, but in the civilian world, not to say you can't assume it, but you need to find your group, your tribe too.
Yes. And Tim, I'd be remiss, because I also help advise another venture company called Human Capital, that is a smaller, earlier stage company who's also the same, as described, and really enjoy being with that team also.
And that team, because I just talked with Matthew Colford actually
Sure.
a few days ago, they've done some really interesting dual use / defense tech investments. One is OneBrief, which is doing really well. They've done Anduro, and another recent one, the founder's Cameron McCord, a veteran. And so, yeah, it's just really interesting to see in the past few years more venture firms doing more defense tech dual use investing.
So a couple pieces there. I met Cameron first when I was still in SOCOM, and at that time I think Cameron was working on a sail drone, and one thing that what got take a little step back, when I was in SOCOM, I found some of the best use of my time was to go to a venture capital company, and that's when I met Cameron at a venture capital company, because they bought in
I believe.
That's exactly right. At Lux with Josh Wolf, they bought in 5 or 6 different portfolio companies, and I'd spend half a day, and would give them feedback. And truthfully, I would see really neat new tech that we may not have known about, or we wanted to know more about, that could make a difference in the future. That's what really got me interested. That's why I first met Cameron. He's now with Nominal, and it's interesting that OneBrief, Grant Demery, their CEO, was one of my cadets at West Point. When I was the commandant of cadets, Grant was one of the standout cadets that I first met then, and fast forward 10 years later, now he's running a startup company. I talk to Grant every couple weeks, today even. So
I've heard great things about the success of the company, and it's awesome to see. And our take on defense tech dual use is no surprise, similar to the consumers and B2B side, and that is it's a bit easier to build software rather than hardware and software.
yes, I couldn't agree more. Well said.
What gets you excited these days in terms of the next months to years ahead?
Yeah. I mean, what excited and enjoy maybe two different things. I think there's I'm excited about that I am seeing the Department of Defense, I think, starting to turn a corner with startups, with companies that show promise and try to create venues that may allow them to work faster into that space, and not that valley of death, chasm of death, whatever you want to call it. So that's what excites me. What I enjoy, honestly, is I really just like working with founders. I like seeing where I can maybe give them perspective that I had from the military as they prepare to brief someone, as they're thinking about what's important. What they think is important to the Department of Defense or to a military commander may not be important at all. What may be important to them is a whole different thing. And really I really enjoy looking at these unique capabilities and go, great. And let's think about this, or great, but maybe you should think about approaching it a different way, because that's how a commander may look at it. And so that's what's fun about working a little bit in this space now, Tim.
There's been so much talk about defense innovation. Eric Schmidt, Mayor Bloomberg. I am, how should I say, unfortunately pessimistic about the military adopting startups in a way that it should. I think it will be eventual, but I think I'm near term pessimistic, long term optimistic. And in fact, if you had to say, I think it's like 2 to 4 years out in terms of how much innovation it'll take. I'm curious what your take is.
Yeah, I think adoption and culture is hard to change. The culture drives you a certain way, and then the adoption or adaptation to be able to accept new tech. And truthfully, we have 5-year programs that are already set, that by the time they get there, they're 4.5 years too late. And I think it's playing out in the war in Ukraine. And truthfully, when we're under threat, the fastest developments we ever saw in my time in service was, we talked about earlier, the 10 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we were able to move faster than we ever moved, particularly in special operations, because we had urgent needs. And urgent need statements make you adopt pretty quickly, as when you're getting shot at. And we're not necessarily getting we are getting shot at in some places still today, but I'm concerned about the adaptation. And truthfully, for the one of my favorite books is Chris Brose's Kill Chain, that I would commend to folks, where we really we need to start buying a lot of little things that are expendable, that are autonomous, that are AI driven, vice a bunch of expensive, large, easily shot down capabilities. And I think this is what you're getting at, Tim. Is I'm a little pessimistic that we're moving too slow in that direction. But it's hard to change with that. You got to change organizational structure. You got to change culture. There's a lot. You're moving a lot of cheese when you do that.
Speaking of cheese and innovation, One of my heroes, I would say, or people I really admire, is General Shinseki,
Yeah.
because I think he's the last major chief of staff who did both the doctrine and the technology innovation with the Stryker brigades and Interim Brigade combat team. That might be too much of a bold statement, but I just feel like the Stryker was like a major kind of piece of technology, and the timing for it. I'm biased because I was a Stryker guy. Just like it was perfect. Like the survivability, the maneuverability, the lethality. And so I'm curious. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'm a big General Shinseki fan. So yes, I agree with you. And then on top of that, he also had immense character. I'd be remiss if I didn't, you know, recall when we invaded into Iraq in 2003, he said this is going to take a lot more manpower, and he stuck to his guns, and it did, and he was right. So General Shinseki is a great hero. I do think that and because I've known the chief of staffs since of the Army, and I do think that all of them are trying to innovate and move in that direction, but it is challenging. But I do think we still have to continue to look for ways to make that revolutionary vice evolutionary.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah. Two things. One, continued self-study. The military gives tremendous professional development. It's in some they do it institutionally through various courses the military does. You go to war colleges, you go to basic courses and advanced courses, but you can't discount your own professional individual study. And my younger self, I wish I'd read a lot more, studied, because you can't make up time. And so that would be one that I would emphasize. The two that I think it's worth talking to more junior officers, mid-grade officers is, and go back to a little bit to my story, Tim. I had no design to stay in the Army past 5 years. In fact, when I proposed to my wife at 4.5 years, I told her I was getting out because she wasn't going to marry into the military. And I told her at 4.5 years, I'll be out in about 1.5 years. I just have this company command thing to do. But the one thing I tell I would continue to emphasize to my younger self, and I tried to live up to it, but I would emphasize this with more junior officers or people just starting off in their careers, is do your best every single day. Do every single thing you're supposed to, because at the end of the day, then if you decide to lead the organization, you're doing it on your terms, even though you've done your best, because you've done your best, and then you say it's my turn. You really want to love the company you're with and do your best for them, so that if you say, "Hey, it's time for me to leave," they go, "No, we really want you perform to your best no matter where you are. You grow where you're planted. While at West Point, I wanted to be the gray man. I wanted to hide, not be the person. You don't volunteer for anything. I joined when I went into my first duty assignment. Volunteer for everything, grow, learn, develop, and so I wouldn't say I did that perfectly, but that's something that I would emphasize to anybody in whatever industry they're going into.
How would you describe your leadership in as few words as possible? Maybe even like 5 to 7.
Okay. People focused first, mission, and collaborative. You know,
Nice.
the best ideas don't come from the top. Those would be the words that I would use for me, Tim.
I now have some rapid fire questions. Favorite books?
Okay. I mean, and I'm going to use this to tell the favorite books. You can see behind me. I love to read. One of the things that I've done in my retirement, this next chapter of my life, I started a book club. It's a men's. My wife was going to 2 book clubs. I asked if I could join. She said, "Hell no, you're not coming to my book club." So I started my own. I went to some of the men that live here in North Carolina nearby. I said, "Would you be interested in stuff?" Think of we've never thought about it and never done it. And this was in my next chapter. I said, "Okay, book club, only nonfiction, only biographies, autobiographies of leaders." And historic, and it could be, we've read everything from Team of Rivals to books on Truman to Ike. We read the Elon Musk book. This month's book is Rockefeller, by Titan by Chernow. So the reading for me, and I start every book club with 20 minutes of current events, and then go to an hour, and then we stay, have a drink, and have dinner together. I've had 30 plus people show up at a book club with a 700-page book. So I enjoy reading, and the genre that I find the best for me, and I would encourage your listening audiences. You're going to learn, I think, more from reading about people's personal experiences, challenges, and whether that's a biography or autobiography. I love the adage: if you want new ideas, read old books. And I think that one of the best, and I'll get to your point. All the books I named have been great. One of my favorite books I give out often was not a book written in 1972 about Nimitz. And here's an Army guy recommending a book, but I'll tell you, Nimitz, not MacArthur took all the glory and had all the notoriety. Nimitz won the war in the Pacific, and then went on subsequently. But reading his career from birth through, and he couldn't get into West Point, so he went to Annapolis. True story. But it's a great. That's one of my favorites.
Perfect segue to who are some of your favorite leaders, historic or present?
Yeah, I name one, Nimitz. And I'll just say for the group, I wouldn't have gone to the 4-star rank leading SOCOM if it weren't for the leaders in the military that I was exposed to in my career. I was blessed with a bevy of them, and that on the enlisted side, people that work for me, but just some great enlisted leaders, and the Hardys, the Merritts, that I the Myers that I got to be around, but then some of the officers, McCraven, McChrystal, Kernan, Dunford, Milley. I mean, so I got to work directly for some of those that people absolutely know of and have heard of. But I'll tell you, Tim, you can't see it, but I keep a picture of my battalion commander go back to the story of battalion commander being the most important position. I was going to get out, but my battalion commander and his wife, when I became a company commander for my second duty assignment, uh, and and observing him, and I was a brand new married captain, and his wife, and the way they developed a team, formed a team. I keep his picture up with me all the time, and I've thanked him many times, because I would be out of the military if it wasn't for him. He's a guy that, Terry Young, that probably no one here would have ever heard of, but he kept this young officer. So I say that because you don't even know the impact you're going to have of people, doing the right thing, treating leaders. You're always being observed when you're in a leadership role. And I think, he set a super high bar. He retired as a colonel. He didn't go on to be a 3 or 4 star like many of the guys I referenced earlier, but he's just an incredible man.
Battalion commander is such an important position, even as a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain, staff officer. My battalion commanders, Eric Carilla, Rod Coffey, tremendous leaders, and so different, but so impactful in the lives of our unit and everyone else. Some of your favorite movies?
I know them both well, and you described Rod and Eric as great leaders, but in their own, everybody's different. So I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. Some of your favorite movies?
This may be a weird one. I love the Blues Brothers. Just classic movie, old 80s movies, probably my college movie. So you can't go wrong with that at all. But you go back to the war classics, like The Dirty Dozen. I'm a comedy guy. I don't watch that many, but those would be a couple.
How about favorite music genre or bands or songs?
Well, it's interesting. I go back to the classics. Rod's, my wife and I love, she Rod Stewart, Bruce Springsteen, Talking Heads. So probably some of the older music that if I'm working out, that I'll listen to. My son has got me into guitar and Billy Strings. That I'm enjoying now, and some of the newer groups, but I still go back to the old classics.
Awesome. I love This Must Be the Place by Talking Heads. Sir, this has been a pleasure and so fun getting to hear about your journey, what you're working on now, your leadership philosophy, and also some of your favorite books. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Hey, Tim, thanks. And I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk, and particularly talk. I think there's one point that I go back and emphasize is the people are willing to help. People are willing to have conversations. And if there's any one takeaway from this, is avail yourself to those that that may have worked for you, but also don't be reluctant or hesitant to call people up, to call up an old boss, an old mentor, and old guys like me, we appreciate when somebody reaches out and say, "Hey, thanks," or "Hey, can you help me out?" We'll drop just about anything. And so I'm glad we had that discussion about that, and I just emphasized to the team and to continue to reach out to old mentors and friends. And Tim, thanks for what you do for our vets and what you're doing with this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. And what profound words to finish this episode with. Thank you again.
All right. We'll see you all. Thanks, Tim.